And so they're going to be here for a day and a half trying to understand what that means and how NASA can take advantage of it. So that's why you're seeing the table set up and various things going on. And those of you who are in the conference, we have an ongoing series here at NASA, which we call Your Virtual World, where we're bringing in a series of speakers to talk about what all this stuff means and how we can take advantage of it as a center. So the intersection of those two is here today with this speaker. We have Dr. Paul Tinari, the founder and current director of the Pacific Institute of the Advanced Study, the world's first globally networked research and development organization. He holds degrees in fluid dynamics, engineering, physics, and solar engineering. Paul is a former Canadian astronaut candidate, the author of several books on creativity and systems thinking, and is a consultant to many government organizations. He speaks regularly at the U.S. Naval War College, where he contributes to the development of future naval defense capabilities. So it's an honor to have Paul with us today, and we look forward to your talk. Thank you, sir.
So I was at a trade fair and I gave away all my business cards, so if you want my information, it's all here. I'm sorry I don't have any business cards for you, but okay, so I wanted to start off with this quote. This is from one of your subcontractors. Over the last few years, it has been readily obvious to me that there is a strong interdependence of technical decision-making with business economics. Okay, so regardless of what you may think, you are a business, not just a scientific organization, but you have to continuously justify your existence. So an example of an organization which was not capable of doing this was one that I'm linked to by family links. My father used to work for Avro Aero in the 1950s. You heard of the CF-105, the Avro Aero? Its capabilities were truly amazing for the time, able to go to 82,000 feet, Mach 2 plus aircraft, beautifully designed, beautiful technical achievement. The problem was that if they forgot that they were a business and not just into the realm of scientific achievement, and so in 1959 they were canceled because they went so far over budget on the Avro Aero. And on that day called Black Monday, 18,000 top technicians, engineers, and scientists were out of work. That directly benefited NASA because many of them, top people, went to work for NASA and were involved in the moonshot. So if you look at the names of the top people involved with the lunar effort, many of them are Canadians who used to work for Avro Aero. So this shows what happens if you forget that you are primarily a business and not just a scientific organization. So this is important because virtual worlds can allow you to have a brand new business model that can allow you to do much more at much lower cost. Now, I'm an applied physicist, an applied engineer, not a theoretician. I work with what works, not theories, not hypotheses. The Pacific Institute was founded to do what the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study did and does, but at much lower cost. So using the then emerging internet in the early 1990s, we designed an organization that could take talent from all over the world and using a virtual meeting place, allow them to parallel process the solutions to very difficult problems. So research and development that used to cost $1 million could be done for $100,000. And we've reduced those costs even further now. So some of the results of our research are novel treatments for back pain that are better than anything else on the market, new types of propellers that are better than anything the U.S. Navy has, and so on and so on. This was all done by harnessing talents of people all over the world who never actually physically meet. They meet through the virtual meeting place of the Pacific Institute. And each time I have a client approaching me with a project, I assemble a team from people, 30, 40, 50,000 people who work with us all over the world. That team only exists for the project, then gets dissolved, then a new team gets assembled for the next project. Now you see how this dramatically reduces costs. Everyone is a part-time employee. The key word for the future is open. Remember this word. It's the most important word you're going to hear. In the 1980s, I was a consultant at IBM, and I told them the key word, open. Now, their response was, next consultant, please. But look at what I was trying to tell them. The future was not computer systems, each with its own operating system. You had Honeywell, you had Commodore, you had Atari, you had each one with a different operating system. If you saved the file in one system, you could not transport it to another. Why was Microsoft so successful? Because they created open systems. If I create a file in Word here, I can open it in China. I can open it in Saudi Arabia. It's universal. It's open. Right. Now, Linux went one step further. Completely open development. People from all over the world who have never met parallel process the development of the Linux operating system. I believe the future is open. NASA and other organizations are still operating on a closed, relatively closed model. More open than it used to be, but still closed. Open is the way to go, and virtual worlds are the way to do that. We're going to see how. So what are the characteristics of Web 2.0, which is a big enabler of virtual worlds? Collective intelligence, tapping the knowledge and experience of huge numbers of individuals and teams all over the world. First of all, tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and then millions. This could not be done before the development of Web 2.0, but now it's possible. Mashups, aggregations of content from various online sources. The first group to try mashups was the Skunk Works, Lockheed Skunk Works. When they developed the stealth fighter, they didn't reinvent everything. They took the landing gear from the F-18. They took flight control systems from another aircraft. They took electronic systems. They used what was already available, mashed it up into a brand new aircraft. They invented where necessary and used what already existed when possible. And this is how they were able to do great things. So they were the first people to mash things up. Now with Web 2.0, you can mash up using thousands of systems sourced from many different areas. RSS, real simple syndication. Subscriptions to online distributions, news, blogs, and podcasts. Well, most people know all about that. Social networking. Examples are Facebook that allow people to present what they're doing each day, what their skills, talents, knowledge are, preferences. Web services. Automatic communications between different systems to transmit information. We're going to be talking about that in detail coming up. Wikis comes from the Hawaiian word meaning quick. Systems for collaborative publishing. These are all components of Web 2.0. The vision of the next 50 years requires a logical, incremental, stable, sustainable plan that can be executed with realistically attainable budgets. This is Michael Griffin, one of your people. So the question I ask, is it possible to formulate a radically new long-term business plan for NASA that will allow it to achieve its ambitious goals while staying within increasingly constrained budgets? Isn't that on each of your minds right now? This critical question. And I believe virtual worlds will allow you to do this, to do more with less. Problem, according to C4ISR Journal, October 2008, when faced with tight budgets in the 1990s, NASA attempted to launch a series of better, faster, cheaper space probes. The systems were produced faster and cheaper, but not always better. This is their words, not mine. Mistakes were made, mistakes that could have been prevented if a better model was in place to catch them, or better still to prevent them from being made in the first place. The problem is when you rush, when your budgets are constrained, more mistakes are made. So how can you do more with less while making fewer mistakes? Sounds almost illogical, impossible, but I assure you it isn't. So what is a virtual world? An artificial environment created in cyberspace, a simple definition. So it's nothing like what you see in the real world. The laws of physics and economics don't have to apply here, even though you can design a world where they do. Options are unlimited here, which is really good for us because we can do anything at low cost. So a type 0 virtual world, we've heard from a previous speaker, augmented reality. It's not really a virtual world, but it's a semi-virtual world. That's why I call it a type 0 world. So it enhances what you see in the real world. So you put on some glasses and you're walking down the street and a little sign says, the store you're just passing is offering a sale on shoes right now. If you're interested, turn left right now. That's the lowest level of augmented reality. Next highest level, imagine a mission specialist on the space station who's not specifically trained to maintain a particular system that fails. It turns out that the astronaut who is trained is sick that day and is unable to do the work. The system specialist puts on the glasses and is able to be guided through the repair steps by the augmented reality system. So an example of this in the movie Terminator, when the machine looks at a clutch or a stick shift, instantly all the details, the internal mechanisms of the stick shift appear on his visual screen. That's what I'm talking about. You look at a system and you can instantly see all the internal workings and then how it can be fixed. Step-by-step guide. So that's the next higher. Now there's even a third level, which I saw when I was in England, which is frightening actually, but I assure you it's a reality. Imagine a police officer putting on virtual reality glasses or augmented reality glasses and walking down the street. Every person that he or she sees is subjected to facial recognition. A supercomputer linked by wireless through the system identifies who the person is and instantly lists their name, any rap sheet they have, any unusual interactions with the law they may have had in the past. So instantly a police officer knows everything about everyone they're encountering as they're walking down the street. It sounds science fiction, it sounds frightening, and I assure you it's possible. Now, can you imagine the personal privacy issues associated with this? I'm not here to talk about the ethics of virtual worlds or these other systems. I'm here to present to you what is possible. And I'll let other people talk about the ethics of it. But I assure you that anything that can be done will be done by somebody. So type 1 virtual world, R&D conducted online via crowdsourcing. So here's the first major application which I think that NASA should plunge into as quickly as possible. So you have two possibilities here. The site hosts developers of new technologies looking for parties to commercialize it. So you have long lists of technologies which have been developed, and they're looking for people who need that technology, who want to commercialize it. Or you have patrons use the site to post problems and offer a payment to anyone who develops a viable solution. So I myself earn a sizable portion of my own income solving these problems. So every evening I log on to my favorite site. In my case, it's yet2.com or innocentive.com, and I look at a list of problems that are being listed, and I look for ones that are in my area, or even not my area, but in my area of interest. And can I solve that in a realistic time frame? And then I'll submit a solution. Sometimes I win, sometimes I don't. But the point is that thousands and thousands of people around the world are looking at these problems and producing solutions, right? And I've talked to some of these people who are posting the questions and want help, and they'll say, we paid $5,000 for a solution from someone in Bahrain, who we never even knew existed, right? And it would have cost us $50,000 to produce that solution in-house, and yet we produced it for $5,000. So my first proposal to you, to NASA, is that you break down each project you have into a series of sub-problems that have to be solved, and you post them online, and you harness the talents of people all over the world to help you solve these problems. As talented as you all are and your people are, you have some of the best talent in the world here, you do not have all the talent. There's thousands and thousands of people who are experts in hypersonics and fluid mechanics all over the world who are not being used by NASA and would love to work for you, even if only virtually. And not only that, they'll be paid for it, and it'll be a win-win situation, to use Covey's term, because they will get paid for a solution. They'll feel satisfaction of having contributed to the space program. You will get a solution for 1/10 or 1/100th the cost it would cost you to develop in-house. Win-win. Can't get much better than that. So the two parties never meet or interact in this, and this is the lowest level of virtual world interaction, but it's still highly effective. So here's some examples of Yet2.com, Innocentive, 9 Sigma, Idea Connection, P&G Connect and Developed. There's also online surveys, which is interesting, at quadrotics.com. I welcome you to look at these sites, and if you're interested, if you have a hobby in solving problems, you'll love this. And plus you can earn some extra money doing it. So I welcome you to look at these. Type 2 virtual world, facilitated social networking. So you can have various forms of social working, including posting, blogs, pictures, message walls. These are becoming increasingly sophisticated. So why has Facebook become so much more successful than MySpace? A, use the Canadian term, because Facebook allowed so much more interactivity, right? And so people flocked into Facebook, and MySpace is in decline, right? Interactivity is what people want. Now, even though there's no direct contact between participants, they do have instant messaging, email, and chat lines that allow them to communicate. This can be used for low-level business and scientific meetings, so it is possible to use it for that. And team members can get together to parallel process solutions to problems of mutual interest. So MySpace, Facebook, LinkedIn is the business site here. This is the one used by most business people and scientific people. And of course, the famous Twitter, which was the subject of an Oprah program. So Oprah was overjoyed when she Twittered for the first time. Okay, commercial networking sites, here's a list of them. And when you get the handouts emailed to you, you can look at these. Type 3 virtual world, free online services developed in parallel by uncompensated networks of individual developers. So this is a real big one. Totally unexpected because it was never foreseen that unconnected individuals could work in an unorganized fashion to develop something useful. But it's happening right now. A network of contributors to develop a service that benefits everyone, including those outside the network. There's no direct contacts between the hosts and the voluntary developers or between the individual developers. Sometimes basic order is sometimes loosely maintained by a centralized authority, but this is not necessary, but often it does happen, and some, like Linux, Linus Torvalds still maintains control, especially over the core of Linux. Most of the work now is being done on the periphery. So Linux, Wikipedia, YouTube are examples of this. And I've done a lot of testing of Wikipedia. I deliberately put in an error in one of the entries in Wikipedia. It took 1 minute and 31 seconds for it to be corrected. Now, how long would it take an error in Encyclopedia Britannica to be corrected? It would take months or years, right? So that's truly amazing. There's over, I think it's 2,000 to 3,000 new entries a day going in. It's increasing all the time. So if you haven't already looked at Wikipedia, it's truly a fantastic thing. So eventually, it'll compile all human knowledge. So a qualification of your status in a particular community can be seen if you have a Wikipedia entry on you personally. Right? Have you ever looked at your own name in Wikipedia, see if you're listed? Well, that's one way to see how your standing is. Okay, YouTube, of course, it started out just as a fun site where people would post joke little videos, but now has a medical section. So medical students are now using it to look at protocols and methods of doing surgery and so on. There's an economic section. There's all types of subsections now which are for serious research and development. So I foresee a huge educational component to YouTube developing. We're still at the Model T version of these technologies. What is going to come will be truly astonishing, I believe. Type 4 virtual world, immersive 3D graphical environment. This is getting really interesting now. So hosts create a blank stage and provide the basic tools for users and some basic rules, and they create their own, the users themselves create the 3D graphical environments in which they're going to live and operate and play and work. So it's totally user constructed and made. Users interact with self-created avatars. Does anyone know what avatar means, where it came from? No? It's a Hindu word for a godlike entity. Yeah. So the user-constructed virtual world, and people interact with their avatars. Now, the avatar could look like you, or you could actually change your gender if you want. If you're not happy with your present gender, you can make an avatar of the opposite gender. Or if you don't even like what species you are, you can create yourself as another species, an alien or an animal. There's absolutely no limits here. Interactivity can occur at many, many levels. A virtual world may reflect features of the real world or may be a total user-constructed fantasy. It's your choice. So you can create an island there where all the laws of physics and economics apply, or you can create something that's total fantasy. It can be used for entertainment, social interactions, or for more serious and scientific applications. This is only now being explored, but it's a blank slate. I mean, there's so much that could be done here. It's just breathtaking. So Second Life and there.com are examples. So here's an example of an avatar. Now, I didn't just pick this picture at random. I chose it because the bathing suit is actually made by a business in Second Life. They sell bathing suits to avatars. I mean, you don't want a naked avatar, right? So you have to clothe it. So you have to buy clothing made in Second Life. And so people are running viable businesses and making money selling things that other people need, like clothing. Right? Now here the person's underwater, and they do have a tank, but you can have people flying and dematerializing and rematerializing. There's no limits to what you can do. So here's an example of a virtual art gallery. So you can have virtual art shows. There's a virtual gathering place here where avatars can socialize, have disco dances. You can have virtual meetings. So for example, an organization such as IBM can create an island and then have conferences. So where each attendee sends their avatar to the conference to attend. Now this is of great interest to you. This is a museum of old rockets that's in Second Life, showing the history and the progression of rocketry. So there are educational components to this that are very useful and productive. So brief history of virtual worlds goes back to 77, multi-user dungeon, or a MUD. The novel Neuromancer, produced by Gibson, where the word cyberspace was used for the first time. 85, Lucasfilms releases Habitat for the Commodore 64. Remember that Commodore 64? We're not talking about 64 gigabytes here. We're talking about 64K. Who was it who said that 64K should be enough for anybody? Active Worlds, a 3D virtual world allowing users to communicate with each other, is released in 97. Movie The Matrix released in 99. 02, Sims Online launched. 03, Second Life and There launched. So not so long ago, but see how far we've come in such a short time. 5-6 years. Massively multiplayer online game, which is an MMOG. Final Fantasy 11 reaches 500,000 players. 04. 05, Linden Labs releases a currency for Second Life. So now, I don't know what the exchange rate is right now, it's something like 5 Linden dollars for 1 real dollar, but there are now millionaires who have made money, this money in Second Life. How are they doing it? They have boutiques that sell clothing. There's actually real estate agents who operate in Second Life who will sell you real estate and help you develop it. So they're developers that will build islands for you and build conference centers. So there's real money being made. It's only a matter of time before real science gets done. And I'm going to explain in a moment some of the applications in the real world that Second Life is being put to. 06, IBM establishes a corporate property for meetings and research. There's an example of the IBM Island, which I was talking about. Edwards establishes a campaign headquarters in a virtual world. Now notice that the location hacked and defaced by cyber protesters. So wherever you're going to have a world, you're going to have criminals, unfortunately. Now this is one of the big questions right now. How do you police a virtual world? Like there's actually a case where one avatar sexually assaulted another avatar. Now what do you do when there's no police force, so there are no laws? I mean, is that a crime when one avatar attacks another? Who knows? 08, Google launches Lively. IBM works with Second Life to develop a virtual world interoperability. In other words, each virtual world had its own avatar, its own method of doing things, and you cannot move one from the other. So now all of the virtual worlds can now interact with each other. So an avatar created in one will operate in all of them. So the word open, once again. Open, that's the key. If you come away from this conference with anything, remember the word open. Better Business Bureau is opened in 2008 to resolve business disputes between residents. 2008, again, Second Life Exchange Commission set up for residents with listings on the virtual stock exchange to set minimal standards for identity and financial disclosure. So you see, it's approaching like a real world here. You have security issues, you have real estate, you have a stock market. This is pretty amazing for something totally user-constructed, ad hoc, without planning. Right? There's no one organizing this. There's no government here telling people what to do. There's very little regulation, and yet things are happening. It shows what can be done with self-organized groups. So we already know what an avatar is. You can buy, sell property, yes. What are Fortune 500 companies doing? They've bought virtual world property and have launched cyber versions of themselves in Second Life. Many charities and clubs also have a presence. Oh, by the way, does NASA have an island or a presence in Second Life now? Yes? Good. Good. Griefing uses cyber vandalism. So Chung was the first millionaire in Second Life, and she was griefed during an interview in the May 2007 interview, and the ABC island was cyber bombed and completely destroyed. So this is a problem. What's happening at the leading edge right now? Second Life is changing how companies design products and interact with their customers, how professors train medical students, how people explore ideas and interact and have fun. Well, this is important. Now virtual worlds will soon allow people to see their future selves, help them understand the impact of their actions, personal choices, and behaviors. So let's say your goal is to reduce the incidence of obesity, right? You can show someone, if they keep eating what they're eating right now, what they'll look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, right? And if that's not enough to frighten them, nothing will, okay? So they'll react to that, okay? Also, they can be shown what happens if they were to start a mild exercise program, what they'll look like 5 years, 10 years, and so on. So there's no limit to what you can do on this. The limit is only your imagination. So it's important that people see and feel the consequences of actions, and Second Life can do that. So virtual worlds are serving to improve corporate internal processes. So they can use them as an extension of the office for collaboration and new ways of working. So here's an example of a Quag office combines multiple applications so they can be viewed and edited by a group. So for example, you can do group mind mapping online. You can post all of the details of a project and have massive collaboration. So this is where I suggest you should consider the word open once again. So post all of the details of an important project. It would be a very important project here, the Constellation project, the X46 project, the X51 project, right? Post them online and invite everyone on Earth to look at them and then entertain suggestions how to improve subsystems. This can now be done very, very economically. So you can experiment with lots and lots of alternatives and designs at very low cost. So if you build a building here in real world, well, the building is more or less fixed. It's very expensive to change. We were talking about a $200 million wind tunnel, right? Well, you can build a wind tunnel in Second Life for a lot less than that, I assure you. And using supercomputer algorithms, you can allow anyone to build virtual models and test them in a virtual wind tunnel. Why not? So here's an example of a virtual university, which can have virtual professors, virtual courses. Education now becomes a much more affordable commodity. One of the fastest growing costs in our society is the cost of higher education. Anyone here have kids going to university right now? You have to mortgage your home? Right? Well, that can change with a virtual university. You can attend classes for a fraction of the cost. And in addition, you can listen to lectures given by the world's leading authorities, like listen to a physics lecture by Richard Feynman or a relativity lecture by Albert Einstein. There's no limit to what can be done. A multiverse, different from most virtual worlds platforms, and it's just building software which is licensed out to other people to build their own worlds. So in other words, you provide software and people build it. So the first worlds built using multiverse technology were made available to the public in '08, this just last year, very quick here. To help get users started, Multiverse built its own virtual Times Square and Fantasy Kingdom as demo worlds. Anyone can use the software and build the public worlds for free without paying, so long as the developer lets users into the world for free. So anyone on Earth can contribute to this. And this is the business model that I'm emphasizing NASA should adopt. Open yourselves. Allow everyone to contribute to your research and development efforts. Because even though you're very smart, you're not as smart as the 6-7 billion people on the planet. That there are people out there who know something you don't. Just think, in the early 1900s, there was lots of very high-quality physicists in the world, and yet the major physics innovation in 1905 was done by an obscure patent clerk. Today, that person could contribute to research at NASA without having to be hired and work for NASA. So if the developer charges for access to the world, then Multiverse takes a 10% cut of the revenue. Well, this is a business model, way of earning money. The server is available for free to developers to build ecosystems, to encourage end users to download and install its client by making many worlds available that can be accessed through the software. So naturally, this is good, but there are problems associated with, of course. Second Life is sometimes unstable, sometimes difficult to use, and users need to be running a powerful PC with fast internet connection. This is becoming less and less of a problem. More and more people now have fast internet connection, and a reasonably fast computer can be had for $600 right now. Right? I mean, right now, if someone has a $600 multi-core processor machine, they have more computational power than a supercomputer of 10 years ago. That's truly amazing. Now, by the way, looking again at virtual worlds, another view of virtual worlds is virtual computing. In other words, I noticed when I was driving here that there's a computing center right near here, right? As NASA harnessed the capabilities of linking together millions of personal computers around the world to do supercomputing instead of having a supercomputer. Have they done that yet? No. Okay, well, it's already been done in the private sector. So right now, someone released, this last year, someone released what they believed was a very secure encryption code. And an individual who's only 19 years old, for one weekend, harnessed together about 25,000 PCs and broke the code over the weekend. Right. Now, this is a teenager doing it just totally as a hobby. Now, you can imagine what you people could do with all your knowledge and skills, harnessing millions of PCs. You don't need supercomputers anymore. You can now harness the computational power of the planet to solve virtually any problem. It is possible. And if you don't do it, the private sector will. So there is a learning curve associated with using and living in a virtual world, but that learning curve is rapidly falling as the tools become easier to use and more people become comfortable with the concept of virtual worlds. Many military applications. So for example, Marines, Special Forces training, so you can develop any scenario you want, any type of hostage rescue, any type of training scenario you want can be developed in a virtual world, and it is so realistic that it's virtually indistinguishable from the real scenario. So as you all know, pilots can now become fully qualified in a type of aircraft simply by flying the simulator of that aircraft. You don't have to fly the real aircraft anymore. I mean, that's quite a long time that's been around. We all know, I mean, I'm a pilot myself, and that's truly amazing if you think about it. I think that some of the passengers would be stunned if they found out that the pilot they have had never actually flown that aircraft in real life, purely in a simulator, but that's a fact. So the goal is saving the lives of Marines and making the use of realistic scenarios scenarios to allow people to reach very high skill levels. Sights, sounds, smells of combat are reproduced in great detail. What are the future of virtual worlds? It'll soon be very difficult to distinguish virtual worlds from real worlds. Second Life already has a luxurious hotel on tropical islands. You can do skydiving, skateboarding, virtual campuses, including teachers, lecture rooms. I hate to say it, but virtual sex too. Escort agencies, red light districts. You have to have all these things because they exist in real life, so naturally they're going to exist in Second Life. Table dances, purchase and vending of land, real estate, cars, furniture, clothes, 3D chat, and all the rest of it. And this is only the beginning. Now, can you imagine, you already have people right now who have cyber addiction, using the very primitive systems we have now. Some people are addicted to Second Life, some people are addicted to online chat, and so on. Right now, with what is coming, the technology is coming, this is going to be a very serious problem, the cyber addiction. And I'm going to explain why. It's coming up right now. Visions of the future. Virtual worlds are just one manifestation of the metaverse that's going to evolve in the next 10 years. So we've looked at augmented reality. Life logging is people who say everything that they do. I don't know why people do this, but they say, well, I just went to this next door neighbor today, and they write it in Facebook. They seem to have nothing better to do. But this is called life logging. You have mirror worlds. So for example, Microsoft is creating a mirror world of the entire planet. Has anyone explored this world? Yeah, it's created a program called Virtual World, and you can go, and let's say you've always wanted to see Rome, just go to Rome and explore it. You can go into the Forum, you can go see St. Peter's, you go as if you were there, walking through it, flying over it, right? Anything you can do in the real world, almost, you can do in the virtual world. So this is called a mirror world. It mirrors the real world. And I mean, imagine the tourist opportunities here. If you can't afford to bring your whole family to go see the pyramids of Egypt, you can explore them through Microsoft Virtual World. I think that's sort of neat. And we've talked about virtual worlds here. So this is just showing what's available. Artificial playmates. I know that sounds bad, but this has a real medical application. For autistic children, they're unable to sustain play or social interaction with real people. So it's possible to create virtual playmates for them. So here's an autistic child with a virtual playmate who benefits enormously from this virtual world that they can interact with. Extension of peer-to-peer to virtual worlds. This is only now beginning. But you can see here is a virtual basketball game where avatars are playing with other avatars. So the peer-to-peer is mixed with a virtual world to create a game. And the next step of this is, of course, is research and development done with thousands of people. Something that could never be done in the real world without expenditure of great amounts of money can now be done in peer-to-peer in a virtual world. Virtual reality therapy. This is of great importance to the Mars mission because you're going to have a group of astronauts who are going to be traveling for months. Right? Naturally, they're going to have potential for problems. An astronaut might get a burn, a cut. An astronaut might have psychological problems and so on. Well, you don't have the luxury of having a psychiatrist go and visit them and so on. How can you produce therapy for people in isolation? Now, brain distraction is a good way to reduce pain. This has been known for a long time. For example, there's a case of a truck driver that was listening to a particularly nice tune on the radio, and he had his arm yanked off by a side-swiping car that hit his truck. His arm was removed, but he wasn't aware of it for about 2 or 3 minutes because his brain was distracted. So virtual reality immerses users in a 3D computer-generated world that's ideally suited to distracting patients from their pain. So this shows actually functional MRI scans showing the difference between the pain experienced by someone without the virtual reality simulation and someone with here. You see, notice the pain level is much, much less. So this is proof that this works. This is not just theory, this actually works. So notice the pain centers here, highly illuminated. Notice with the virtual reality therapy, the pain is much, much less. So burns are among the most painful injuries that people can sustain. A burn patient uses the virtual reality program to relieve the pain of wound care. Virtual reality programs are significantly more effective than video games at distracting the patients from the excruciating levels of pain. So this is a program made specifically for burn patients called Snow World. So they imagine the cooling effects of the cold climate and snow on their burns, and it actually reduces the pain as shown by the functional MRI. So this, I'm just talking about the research was successful, and that's directly applicable to your long-term research on the Mars mission and the psychological aspects and physiological aspects of long-term trips into deep space. Phobia therapy. What happens if halfway through a Mars mission an astronaut develops a phobia? What do? Well, phobia therapy is one possibility. It can be used to combat phobias by exposing patients to realistic graphic simulations of their greatest fears, like pain control programs, altering the chemistry of the brain. Exposure to the simulation changes the way people think, behave, and interpret information. So here's someone who's dreadfully afraid of spiders, and they are receiving a virtual reality program exposure designed to help phobic patients overcome their fear of spiders. It provides tactile feedback, so when they actually touch the spider, they can feel the little hairs on them. I see people cringing already. Right? There's some fear of spiders here? Well, you benefit from this therapy. So the conclusion here, virtual reality and virtual worlds can help reduce the reliance on drugs and will permit more aggressive wound care and physical therapy, speeding up recovery and cutting medical costs. Obviously, this would be vital in a long-term space mission to deal with any injuries or psychological problems that might arise. Cyberkinetics. FDA approval received for a clinical trial of a brain implant designed to allow paralyzed patients to interact with a personal computer. You're going to see in a moment the applications this directly has to the space program. So many types of internalizing technologies such as cochlear and optic nerve implants are converging into interactive chips that can retrieve detailed and specific info from the brain so that complex tasks can be done by thought alone. You might see where this is leading. So for example, in the space station, control of the Canadarm, instead of done by a manual method, could be done by a purely mental process. In other words, the Canadarm could become an extension of the astronaut's own arm, allowing much more detailed manipulation of external objects. An application which I've been working on with the Air Force is linking a pilot intimately to the aircraft, so that instead of seeing a radar blip indicating an approaching missile, the pilot would feel the radar. So if a missile's approaching from the rear, they would feel a tingling in their back of a certain type. The more intense the feeling, the closer the missile is, and the greater the threat. So they can respond much more rapidly to the threat than looking at a visual stimulus in front of them. So in other words, the aircraft and the pilot become one. The aircraft or the spacecraft become an extension of the operator's own body. This is now possible. We're not just talking dreamland here. This can actually be done right now. So here's an existing situation where brain-machine interface helping a patient paralyzed by spinal injury. Chip converts the thoughts and movements into codes transmitted by radio frequency signals to the controller backpack. This can all be miniaturized into one chip now. So quick is the development that what used to take an entire backpack now can be put onto one chip. Controller converts the signals into motor commands that are transmitted wirelessly to chips implanted in the various muscles, allowing them to move. So the paralyzed can now move. This is an interesting little thing, a rat-driven robot. Neural signals from an electrode implanted into a rat's brain are used to control a mobile robot. So in other words, the rat thinks about how it's going to move through a maze, and the robot moves as if the rat was moving. The application, of course, is astronauts controlling mechanical versions of themselves going into hostile environments. So for example, looking in the distant future, astronaut in orbit around Titan can have a mechanical reproduction of themselves exploring the surface of Titan. And every motion that the astronaut does, or every thought of motion, is reproduced by the mechanical extension of themselves, thereby vastly increasing the efficiency with which missions can be carried out and reducing the cost and increasing the safety for the astronauts. EEG readings of thought patterns guide a miniature robot through a model house. So here's someone who's moving a robot through a model here without touching it. EEG readings of thought patterns act to interface to translate a subject's thoughts into words on the computer screen. Obviously, this application to the paralyzed, but many, many applications for the space program. Magnetic brain imaging. So standard EEG is inadequate for detecting localized neural activity in the brain because the electrical fields are spread out and distorted as they pass through the skull. Problem, how do you solve it? Well, MEG can accurately detect the faint magnetic fields generated by neural activity. The sensitivity of this detector is achieved by the use of what's called a SQUID, a superconducting quantum interference device. Now what's interesting about this device, it can detect magnetic fields 1 billion times weaker than the Earth's field. Individual SQUID readings are translated by software into detailed schematics showing the strength of the magnetic field at each location in the brain. There's the original version of a SQUID. This can now be reduced now to a helmet. Functional magnetic resonance imaging. Blood flow low in oxygen causes a slight distortion as it flows through a magnetic field. Blood high in oxygen does not. This allows hyperscanning of the brains of people carrying out daily activities. The resolution has progressed from 1 cubic centimeter down to 1 cubic millimeter, and it's going to go down to 1/10 of a cubic millimeter shortly. This represents 100,000 neurons, eventually down to 10,000 neurons, down to 1,000, and eventually down to a few dozen. To be able to see exactly what each portion of the brain is thinking and interpret that and to translate into signals that can be used to activate external systems. So the goals of the research are to understand the brain patterns associated with each specific human emotion, love, fear, humor, etc. Learn about the neurology of decision making. This is actually a new science called neuroeconomics. In other words, a SQUID helmet is put onto a subject and they look at a commercial and you can tell exactly how that commercial has activated the emotions of the subject. Do they hate the commercial, but they want to please you, so they tell you that they like it? The SQUID magnetometer doesn't lie. It tells you if you actually hate what you're seeing. On the horizon, you will have systems that can detect thought patterns in people going through airport scanners. So if someone is planning a terrorist act, you can detect it in their brain. Sound like science fiction? No, I assure you it isn't. Now, imagine the privacy concerns here where the government can actually get into our heads and see what we're thinking. Magnetic brain stimulation, this is an example of what can be done, will be done. When I talked about 5 years ago to the military about this, it was just a theory then, but it's now been implemented, and I'll explain what it is. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, uses pulses of magnetic energy to introduce electric currents that should be specific brain regions. A powerful magnet over the frontal regions of the skull delivers magnetic pulses. Treatment allows biochemistry and firing patterns of neurons in the cortex. The therapy can be fine-tuned by adjusting location, intensity, and pulse frequency. And thousands of military personnel, this is an application of this, one application, suffer from various forms of post-traumatic stress syndrome and clinical depression that does not respond well to conventional antidepressants such as Prozac and Zoloft. TMS may offer hope, effective treatment of these from individuals suffering from this syndrome. Here's an example of someone undergoing treatment. Researcher delivers magnetic pulses to the brain to generate instant happiness and well-being. Doesn't that sound like 1984? But I assure you it is possible. Now let's look at the application of this that was only a theory 5 years ago and is now being implemented. Consider special forces going into hostile territory with a specific mission. Right? Each of those individual soldiers contains a thorough knowledge of the mission, the purpose of the mission, and as well as a large amount of other knowledge beneficial to the enemy should they be captured. Now imagine this system put into their helmet, that if it looks like any member of the team is about to be compromised, in other words captured, they flick a switch. And the TMS system stimulates a certain portion of their brain that erases their memory selectively. So even if they're tortured, they have no knowledge of the mission or any other information that can be useful to the enemy. Now this sounds totally ridiculous and unscientific. It actually can be done. So instant memory eraser can be done. Now, what would be an application for NASA? Well, let's look at a Mars mission where several months into the mission, something so traumatic happens that one of the astronauts simply cannot get over it and is suffering severe depression or psychological problems, and it looks like they may compromise the mission. You can selectively erase the memory of that situation without erasing other memories that they need to complete the mission, thereby allowing them to continue. Is it ethical? I don't know. Can it be done? Yes. So I understand we're going to have an astronaut talking later on, either today or tomorrow. It'd be interesting to talk to him and ask him what he would think of selective memory erasure if a mission is about to be compromised because of an event that occurs. Is that ethical? Would astronauts accept that? Internet 2. I have some of my friends who are on Internet 2 at Stanford University. They can now download a movie in 8 seconds. So people are trading movies the same way as they trade music right now. So what we see right now, the technology I've just talked about, is just the Model T of what is going to be possible. We're just scratching the surface. And it's moving so fast, it is breathtaking, even for scientists such as myself. For example, all of you now have pen drives, like we call it in Canada. I don't know what you call it here, these things. Right? This one here is 64 gigabytes, right? 64 gigabytes. I saw one at a trade fair made by Toshiba, 4 terabytes. 4 terabytes in this size. So in other words, almost all human knowledge, the contents from every book on earth can be stored in this space right now. Right? Eventually we're going to have 40 terabytes, 400 terabytes, petabytes, exabytes. Now, what are the consequences of having that much information at our disposal? I don't know. So the result is going to be hyper-realistic avatars that will be able to interact with others in ways that will be indistinguishable from living beings. Already, are you aware that actors are having themselves digitized? Tom Cruise has been digitized. So in other words, when the computational power is available, the Tom Cruise digital reproduction will act in movies. The computer will totally control what the actor does. The actor will have no role at all except to provide the original digital image, and they will get a royalty for each film that their reproduction appears in. Now, think of the consequences of that. You don't need actors anymore. You don't need stunt men or women anymore. The actors can be made to do anything because safety is no longer a concern. Right? There's no longer any need for multiple takes. The movie can be filmed very quickly because the computer can very exactly control the facial features, the actions of this digital representation. How fast the technology is moving as we look at Jurassic Park, the T-Rex in the first movie, Jurassic Park. Think of all the digital points that were required to produce that facsimile of a T-Rex. In the second movie, the number of digital points that were used to reproduce the T-Rex was 10 times higher. So in one movie, you went by a factor of 10 in the realistic portrayal of this creature. Right? So, and already the second Jurassic Park movie is already, what, 10 years ago? It's quite a long time ago. So imagine what they're doing now. So the Type 5 virtual world, full sensual immersion and the interactive experience indistinguishable from real life. Ultimate experience will be a full sensual immersion so that the user will be unable to distinguish reality from digital reality. Now, many, many years ago, they tried to produce a computer that would act as a therapist, a psychological therapist, and they tried to test to see if it was indistinguishable from a real therapist. That was one of the first goals of AI, to see if you could produce a therapist indistinguishable. Now, the goal now is to produce digitally created beings that are indistinguishable from real beings. They're getting very, very close to that. So users, through their hyper-realistic avatars, will be able to hear, see, touch, smell, and eventually taste others. Once again, it sounds like science fiction, but already you can buy a device which will sample the air in your immediate area, digitize it, and transmit the smell to another machine that regenerates the smell at the other end. So in other words, now you actually have to consider taking a shower before you go online. Now you might say, what's the use of that? Well, it's a full sensual experience. Like if you're wearing a really expensive perfume, right, you'd like the person at the other end to smell it. So possible applications, rather unfortunate term, teledildonics. Have you heard this term before? Okay. Transmitting touch. So we've heard from a previous speaker, transmitting surgical knowledge through. So a surgeon operating on Earth could have an interface on the space station and do appendectomies or tonsillectomies or any other needed surgery. So in other words, you no longer move the surgeon, you move the knowledge. This is what I've been talking about all along. This is no longer necessary to physically move the talent to your location. You move the knowledge to your location. You don't have to pay to move engineers to this location and hire them and have them work for you. You can now use their knowledge wherever they are, even if they live in Antarctica. You can harness their talents. So medical students can dissect virtual cadavers, huge savings in money to be able to do virtual procedures before you actually do them on a real patient. Engineers will assemble and disassemble complex systems and mechanical assemblies and solve design problems in real time online. Imagine the savings of money there. Online meetings, seminars, conferences will be indistinguishable from the real thing. As avatars become more and more complex, each of us can have an avatar that actually looks like us and moves like us going to a conference. And so I could actually be looking at a whole ocean of avatars and I wouldn't be able to tell that you were reproductions and not the real thing. Individuals will assemble their perfect partners and interact with them in any way they wish for as long as they wish. Now this is a frightening one because imagine that you could go online and from scratch assemble your perfect partner. This is someone who will never say no, never have a headache, never be in a bad mood, right? Now, is there a danger that people would rather interact with their virtual perfect partner than their real life partner? Obviously not everyone, but this will be a very serious problem for some people. You're going to see addiction on a scale that we can only imagine right now. So this is one of the dangers of virtual worlds that I'm bringing to your attention. Not everything I'm saying is good. Okay? My role here is not only to blow sunshine in your direction, but also to give some warnings that we're entering something unexplored here, and I cannot foresee what will happen. And this is one example where I can't foresee what will happen. When people can assemble their perfect playmate, why would they want to play with a real person? Well, here's an example of, this is actually an older picture, so they're actually better now. This is an example of an avatar approaching realistic dimensions. So still looks a little bit fake, but each iteration becomes more and more realistic. So problems, addiction rates, complex systems may not perform the same in the real world as they did in the virtual design process, leading to failures or unexpected failures. One of the ways that Second Life is being used by regulators is that since Second Life is totally unregulated, right, they can introduce regulations in specific parts of Second Life to see what happens. One of the big problems that regulators have is the unintended consequences of their regulations. So for example, we all know the unintended consequences of prohibition. The rise of crime families, Al Capone, everything else, bootleg liquor. Canada played a big role in that. Great supplier of alcohol during the prohibition. This was all unexpected by the regulators. Okay, now, imagine in Second Life, you can introduce a regulation to a part of Second Life and see the effects on the community. What does it do? What are the unintended consequences of this? So you're going to see large-scale testing of things, social programs and so on in Second Life. This is one application of it. One of the things I'm pushing for, some of you might be aware, those of you involved in some biological aspects, you'll know that there's an effort now to produce a totally virtual cell that, using software, can mimic all the processes that go on inside of a real cell. That means eventually you'll be able to test a drug on the in silico version of the cell and see the effects, and to tell if the drug is actually going to work in a real cell, in a real person eventually. Eventually, the FDA will approve drugs based on their results of in silico tests instead of in vivo tests. Right? Now, what I'm pushing for is that a complete software model be done of the U.S. economy. Why would you want something like that? Well, because if you had a complete model of the U.S. economy or the Canadian economy, you could have seen that as people were renewing their mortgages at higher rates and defaulting, that you were about to have a very serious problem. And so something could have been done about it before you had the collapse of Lehman Brothers and other serious effects that occurred. So I just met in Washington yesterday with some individuals. I'm pushing for funding for this type of project, the complete modeling of the U.S. economy. Anyway, this is something I'm doing for virtual worlds. This is my leading edge research. Okay, so I've only scratched the surface here. Time limits me from going into depth in any of these things, but I hope I've stimulated your imagination a little bit, and I've shown you a little bit what is possible. But my conclusion is this, and that is that NASA is a great organization doing great things with great people. You've inspired generations of young people to do things that they never would have considered before by your great accomplishments. However, you cannot rest on your laurels. As I said at the beginning of this talk, under severe financial constraint, you're being asked to do more and more with less and less. This means you have to develop a new business model. The old model no longer works. And if you do not change, then change will be forced upon you with great pain. So I open the floor to questions.
Sir, this is a superb brief. I thank you very much for giving it. It's marvelous. In the brief, there is an implied assumption of an us versus them. It's humans, and what does all this stuff do to the humans? In actual fact, the humans are turning into cyborgs. We are merging with them. It's a cochlear implants, artificial retinas, artificial hearts, direct brain to prosthetic limb, and brain chips. The first brain chips have been implanted, fixing congenitally defective brains, putting in brain chips now to enhance brains, along with the neuro and pharmaceuticals to enhance brains. So can you speculate not on what the machines can do to the humans, but how this will change the human condition and perhaps force a change in the human existence there?
Okay, do I have to repeat the question, or was that understood? Yeah, everyone heard it. Good. Okay, well, first let me say a reference was made to Ray Kurzweil, who's a professional futurist such as myself, and he talks about the singularity, which means the convergence of man and machine. Okay, let me say that, first of all, we do not know what consciousness is. There's no neurologist, no scientist who can talk intelligently about what consciousness is. Therefore, it's totally academic to just talk about the arising of consciousness within machines. Okay, this is what Ray Kurzweil talks about, the singularity, when machines become self-conscious, right, and then humanity and machines merge together into an indistinguishable entities, yeah, right? Okay, now, there's no worry of that for now since we don't even know what consciousness is, so therefore we can't talk about consciousness within machines because we can't even talk about human consciousness. We don't understand how a brain has an emergent property called consciousness. So what we're talking about rather is a much lower level of convergence, meaning where our imperfections are improved through the implantation of machines. So our eyesight is improved, our organs are improved, right? What I see happening before this man-machine cyborg Borg situation is happening much more rapidly is the regrowth of tissues and organs. So believe it or not, I know an individual who's now printing organs using an Epson printer. They create a scaffold in the shape of a heart. They take stem cells and reprogram those stem cells to become heart cells. Then using a printer, print it on the scaffolding to create a rough shape of a heart. As soon as the cells are together, they start living and breathing and living, and they start merging together, and eventually they form a beating heart. And since it's made with your stem cells, it's your heart. It is now implanted into your body to create a brand new heart that works perfectly well. You never need rejection drugs because it's your heart. This can be done with any organ, liver, kidneys, cartilage, whatever. And this gentleman startled even myself, and I'm hard to startle, when he said that within the next 10 years he'll be able to print an entire human being. So to imagine looking like way into the future, you wouldn't have to ship astronauts to Mars or to Jupiter. You simply store the information of what makes each individual astronaut in a computer memory, and when you get to the location, you print them out. And they can now do the exploration. Sound totally ridiculous? I assure you it isn't. So this is what I think is going to happen much before the cyborg revolution. And the reason is because we do not understand what consciousness is. We can improve the brain's function, repair it, but actually reproducing the brain and producing consciousness in machines, this is something that's way into the future. And what we need to do is understand what consciousness is. Is this having to do with what your question was?
Yeah, you've danced around it, but the essential question is, as humans merge with the machines, okay, in other words, it's not a them versus us, what happens to the humans, okay? I mean, do we increasingly become the machines? The consciousness issue is, of course, there, but there's three approaches to human-level machine intelligence. The one that's going very fast is biomimetics, the IBM Blue Brain project, and so forth, which is far more successful than anyone ever thought it would be so far. And the other is emergence. Okay, you just make stuff complex enough and they wake up. This is arguably the way the humans evolved, whatever modicum of intelligence we have to have, and it's not a general intelligence. There's no existence proof for that. So the issue is a request for speculation, and I'll sit down, of what the future of the human condition will be, as opposed to just modifying organs and the rest of the stuff. I mean, essentially, we're a brain. The rest of the stuff is simply to keep the brain going, okay? So as the computer brains are augmenting our brains, okay, at what point do we just say, well, we don't need the rest of the stuff. We'll just hop aboard that brain.
Okay. Yeah, that's a complex question. Let me look at it at a very low level. Okay, originally, people who had handicaps, for example, lost a leg or whatever, would be given a substitute one which was highly inferior, and they were considered lucky to be able to walk again at a low level. Recently, however, something completely different has happened, where the new attachments put onto the people actually allow them to perform better than able-bodied people. Okay? So, for example, we have someone who had no legs, who now has synthetic legs that allow them to run faster than Olympic athletes. And this person was forbidden to take part in the Olympics because they're considered unfair competition, right? So this is increasingly is what's going to happen, is that as humans get augmented, improved, and so on, you're going to have the improved humans getting an unfair advantage over the unimproved humans, leading to tensions and problems. This, at a very low level, this is, I think, is addressing what this gentleman was saying, okay, that as humans are improved, you're going to get conflicts with the unimproved. This is one of the things I foresee. Now, long term, I see no limits. That I believe that there are people alive in this room today who, in theory, could become immortal. At the lowest level, if you're replacing your organs as quickly as they fail, there's no reason you should die. Scientists are very close to understanding the causes of aging. For example, the degradation of telomeres every time a DNA reproduces. If you can prevent the degradation of telomeres, you can prevent aging. So in theory, many of us no longer have to age. Now, think of the problems that will cause. Okay, you'll have a generation of individuals that simply will not die. Now think of the problems for a younger generation waiting for us to die so they can take our jobs or start a career, but we're not going to die. Okay, so society has to be completely reordered to handle this. We're seeing the beginnings of this in Japan, where 1/3 of the population of Japan is over 60. So this is the oldest society that's ever existed in history, and they're encountering huge problems with this. Who's going to take care of the elderly and so on? Now, we're talking about people who are living to their 80s and 90s. There's over 10,000 people in Japan, over 100 right now. Right? Now imagine if you have people who are 500, 1,000 years old. This is not just idle speculation. This is going to happen within the lifetime of many people in this room. So, okay. So, we have time for one more question? Okay. One more question.
So it's kind of interesting you didn't take the final leap on your astronaut model because there was always an astronaut involved. Whereas the engineer could transfer his or her knowledge into a situation but not be physically present. Why does not the astronaut have that same ability to transfer his or her knowledge to the situation and not be physically present, where in fact the astronaut is not biologically suited to be, tremendously increasing cost and risk, where it's now possible that you could have, in effect, a physical avatar of the astronaut somewhere else? Any comments on that?
This is a big problem in the Air Force, for example, where you have the pilot-dominated hierarchy of the Air Force preventing advances. For example, it's much more efficient to have pilotless aircraft that have much higher performance specs. So you take away the pilot and instantly you don't need the ejection seat, the life support systems, whatever. The plane can now turn at higher than 9 Gs, much better performance characteristics because the pilot is the main limiting factor right now. Why is it not happening? Why do we have the F-22 at great expense? What is it, 140 million per aircraft? Because of the pilot-dominated hierarchy. Similarly, I would venture to guess that in NASA you have an astronaut-dominated mindset, right, where there is the belief you always have to have the man or woman on the scene. So this is going to be a big bureaucratic and ethical struggle within NASA and other organizations. Do we need the person with the boots on the planet? Or can we produce the avatar to do the exploration controlled from a distance? Now what's interesting in the Air Force is that you had to have pilot certification to fly UAVs. But the Army has said, no, you will use enlisted men and women to do it, right? And they do it just very well. So once again, you see the pilot-dominated mindset in the Air Force limiting what they can do, okay, and adding to their expenses. So you really have to ask yourselves, you have to do some really deep soul probing here, and that is that, what is it you want to do over the next 50 years? How much money do you have to do it? Okay, you answer those two questions, okay, and then the next step follows saying, okay, now how are we going to do it? How can we do what we want to do at the lowest possible cost and get it done? Okay, because it's absolutely useless if you have a protocol in effect that you can't afford to fund. It's pointless. Right? So these two questions. What do you want to do? I've seen your vision statements. I have a pretty good idea what you want to do. Now, how much money do you have to do it? Well, it seems to me the money's not enough to do what you want to do. Certainly not to fund an entire Mars mission. So then how are you going to do it? Do you really need to send 3, 4, 5 astronauts to Mars? Right? Yeah. Okay. That's right. What are you going to do with the 60,000 people working on that? Okay. Very difficult questions that you have to answer. But let me go right back to the first point I made. You are a business. Your clients are, first of all, the people of the United States, not the people in the subcommittee that regulate you. Your clients are the people of the United States and of the world who admire what you do. Okay, so how can you run yourself as a business? In other words, be profitable, do what you're going to do at an affordable price. And I suggest some of the things I've suggested here should be considered. I strongly suggest that you can dramatically reduce your costs while accomplishing even more. We're not talking about cutting back programs here. We're saying, yes, you can do the programs, but you can do them at much lower cost. All you have to do is change your mindset, change your business model. Okay?
Sharon, did you want to talk about what's